And that's my Alpha 33 unboxed sometime last month. So what's it doing there, and what happened? So let's take a look at the story behind that Alpha. Right, I'm David, and I'm currently restoring a 1985 Alfa Romeo Quadrifoglio Verde. So, what's my interest in doing something like that, and why is this blog called Tropical Alpha? It's called Tropical Alpha because I'm in Singapore, and this is only the second Alpha 33, as far as I know, that's in Singapore from that particular era. And why am I interested in that? Well, I'm not a petrol head, but about 30 years ago, I did own an Alfa Romeo 33, a TI, a twin carbureted TI. And that's not it in those two photos. That's obviously from another page, and the photos were by Adam Clark. However, that picture of me, a much younger me, basically that was me leaning against my Alpha shortly before it was sadly scrapped. So now I'm trying to relive my youth, and I've been looking for an Alpha 33 with the twin carbs and with the 105 horsepower engine. And I've been looking for quite a while, and for 2 or 3 years, I've been looking in South Africa, in Australia, where I actually paid for quite a number of inspections to get cars, but for one reason or the other, they didn't quite meet my specifications. And basically, I let the whole matter slide until this May, when this ad, believe it or not, appeared on Gumtree. Somebody was selling an Alfa Quadrifoglio Verde for nearly 5,000 Australian dollars. I didn't want to pay 5,000 for a car kind of like in that condition. However, I did do an inspection of the car, a third-party remote inspection, which I paid for. But I sort of let it go for a while, and I eventually went back to the seller. And then this, by the way, these were the pictures of that inspection. Colors were faded. The engine had a rough had a valve or a stem seal leak or something of that sort. So the car actually really needed a lot of work. And eventually, I managed to negotiate the price to something that was a lot more manageable. But first, right, what's the story behind the Alpha 33? And I always consider it as one of the unloved Alphas. And I think one of the reasons why it's often considered the unloved Alpha is because it wasn't one of these, right? It wasn't one of these because this is the Alfa Sud, its predecessor, the car that auto journalists were raving about in terms of its stupendously good handling for essentially a sporty family saloon from the 1970s all the way up to the early 80s and before the 33 replaced it. So I think many people hated the 33 because it wasn't an Alfa Sud. Sure, the Alfa Sud, especially in its TI sporty coupe reiteration, had lots of things that the early Alpha 33s didn't have. It had very low unsprung wheel weight because the brakes were inboard rather than more orthodox outboard as the 33 had. It had disc brakes all around. The 33 had drum brakes in the rear. The 33 had a slightly heavier body, which made it slower. And it didn't help that the 33 actually had basically was slightly underpowered when they first came out. And if you take a look at how they reinvented that car, it was basically still an Alfa Sud chassis with a flat four boxer engine. But other than that, the design was different. The 33 was more spacious. It actually had a drag coefficient of something around 0.36, which was better than the Alfa Sud's at 0.39. And it could reach 100 miles an hour 4 seconds faster than the Alfa Sud. But again, it didn't handle as well. The early models were underpowered, and because after people raved about the Alfa Sud, which had its own problems, I must say, like rust, very bad rust, people got the Alpha 33 instead. I think that's why they hated it in many ways. So the Alpha actually essentially came in a few variants in that sense. The Series 1, which is the one I bought, and then there's a facelifted version, the Series 2. And then around 1990, there was a Tipo 907 where it had a complete facelift to make it look similar to the flagship 164 model. So they wanted to have some kind of consistency in the wedge-shaped look, which was again so popular of the 1980s design ethos. And that was a 33, and they built that all the way up to 1994, 1995, and made nearly 1 million. So for a car that was unloved by the auto journalists, it seemed to sell pretty okay. So this is not my car, but this is a 33 Quadrifoglio from the mid 80s. That's my car, and this is unfortunately this is the car I bought, right? Where the red has dulled to a kind of a dull pink, and of course to get it to Singapore where it was, it required quite a lot of work. The paperwork, I know some very specific land transport authority requirements for the car to get here, for example. So a couple of deal breakers would be like if the engine has been swapped out, you couldn't import it, for example. If the exhaust was non-specific, well, you could import it, but you probably have to find a kind of factory spec replacement for that. But that was, sitting there for 16 years in a garage until it was rolled up recently. Recaro seats dirty and faded, and lots of work to do on this car. And eventually on the 17th of June, I paid a negotiated fee of 4,000 Australian dollars for this car. And then while it was waiting to be shipped, I decided to buy some spare parts and load it up. After all, that car is going to be stuck in a container and shipped to Singapore. Why not stuff it with some spare parts, which are virtually impossible to find in Singapore? Singapore, for a variety of complex rules, meant that by 2024, this year, there's only actually 133 still left on the roads. The fuel tank had to be drained before it went in the container. The boxes are packed into the car. Lovely amount of space in the back there. And then finally on 8th of July, after I paid, it was mine. Trailered off to the container port in one piece. Stuffed in, and it's bye-bye Australia, and it was ready to start a new life in Singapore. So a few weeks later, it arrived in Singapore, and I would say welcome to Singapore. It's the most expensive city to own and drive a car. More of that in another episode of this series I'm hoping to make on the restoration of the Alfa 33. So let's take a look at that unboxing that happened a while back. It's not moving on its own power because the engine can't start. And so it is, and so it arrived on one piece and off to the workshop. So what have I spent so much? Well, if you're talking about US dollars, the purchase price was around 2,669 US dollars. And then what else do we have? We had the pre-departure costs, the trailer, the purchasers, packing the car, and then shipping and port fees was about 2,400 US dollars. And eventually the import agent fees to clear customs, the unboxing fee, and the customs and goods and services tax on the car, and the total bill just to get the car to Singapore, not even restored or registered or taxed in that way, was basically just over US $9,000, or sterling equivalent about 6,900 sterling, about 13,500 Australian dollars, and of course Singapore nearly $12,000. So what's going to happen in it? Well, we're probably going to go to the workshop to get some work done on it, and we'll come to that in a later episode. So until then, stay tuned for the next episode of Tropical Alpha, where I'll be talking about what's going on and what's happening to that car. So until then, bye-bye.